Well, tech company CEOs are becoming more and more powerful with a special dual structure, which basically gives executives more votes than regular shareholders when it comes to big decisions for the business. And this used to be quite rare, but Facebook and Google have made this somewhat the norm.
So should founders have this much control when they're using shareholders' money? Joining us for Taking Stock is John Willinge, CEO of Willinge Group, and Stephen Shearer, the digital CEO. Now, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg is the epitome of this, isn't he? He does essentially what he wants. And if what he wants is more control of the company, is he entitled to that as a founder?
Yeah, for me, I think that you know what you're getting when you're investing in Facebook. For me personally, I wouldn't want to be in Facebook without Mark Zuckerberg. I wouldn't want to be in Google without Larry and Sergey and Eric, you know, at least somewhat involved. You wouldn't want to be in Amazon without Jeff Bezos. So I think knowing what you're getting into is really the key point here, and don't buy into Facebook if you think you're buying it for the platform and you want to turf the CEO.
But I guess at the end of the day, if you're raising funds for investors, you know, do they have a right to have an equal say in what goes on?
Yeah, I think there's... I see that argument. I think there's another argument that says, particularly if you're an index fund, let's say, you have to own shares in these companies. You have no choice. Because you simply invest in the index. Right. And therefore, you don't really have a say on who the CEO is and what the board does, because the board has no control. The CEO controls everything. And that can be a problem over time. And I think you're starting to see... It's funny, I used to run Facebook here, and I'm maybe on the other side from John, where I think in a sense Mark Zuckerberg, yes, too much power in a sense. I think he loses accountability to the wider community. Yeah. And, you know, some of these players, I think like Facebook and Google particularly, there's big externalities that we've got to think about now that are coming to bear on society. And if the CEO of those businesses is not accountable to anybody, essentially they're only accountable to themselves, that can be a real challenge, I think, for how we manage those businesses. So I think it's a structure we need to look at closely.
Why do you think this is so big in the tech sector then? I mean, because it seems like the tech sector breaks all the rules, really, when it comes to this sort of thing.
I think two reasons. One, tech, particularly the past few years, has been very founder-driven. Yeah. So, you know, the founders raise the money, they do all the hard work, it's their genius, and bang, before you know it, they're listing on the NASDAQ. And the second reason is investors have just been hungry for tech investments the past few years, and so the founders really, you know, they come with a lot of bargaining power. Just say, hey, I want control, and the investors say, fine, I'll give you my money because I want a piece of that action.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think that there definitely needs to be some checks and balances and measures when it comes to the likes of the Facebooks and the Google around privacy policy, and I think that they should be accountable, you know, generally, you know, I think legally around privacy. However, whether there needs to be control over, well, you made a bad mistake, we actually think we're going to try someone else. I think there's too many examples. Obviously, the famous Steve Jobs one. There's one in MySpace with a company called AO.co.uk or AO.com, which is out of the UK, where the founder was there. It was probably not that appealing to the shareholders. They had a very successful IPO. Then he made a couple of decisions that the shareholders didn't like. He got kicked out. The company tanked, and then they've come back to him and said, "Hey, we need you to run the business again." This is, I think, there's loads of examples of that where I believe, as a founder, that there's just no way that an external shareholder is going to get even 10% of the knowledge of what's going on in the business that I'm going to have, and they might make a judgment call that just doesn't, you know, isn't right for the business. And for me, I'd want that ability to have that that dual class of share. And I'm sure that the investors, maybe some of the more institutional ones that have to invest in the index and have to be there, maybe a different story. However, most of them probably aren't complaining when they get a discount on that IPO share price because of the dual class of share.
I think that's absolutely true. I think it's interesting, if you look at the Steve Jobs example in his story, you know, he was essentially kicked out of Apple. He was fired. And he went into the wilderness and started a different business and made that successful. And then he had to be brought back to Apple. They begged him to come back because the business had tanked so much during his absence. But I think that's a great example of where, you know, he was a genius founder. He was kept accountable. I think if you read the story about Jobs, I think there was a lot of reasons why he was fired. And then there was good reasons why they brought him back. But the key was that the board and the company had the say in how to do that. And I think there's a risk we have with some of these founders that we can't kick out, that they're simply not accountable. And when things are going great, shareholders are super happy. But And I hope Facebook keeps going great. But if Facebook ever really suffers, its share price really declines, and it has a lot of negative sort of externalities on society, if you can't shift Mark out of there, or you can't keep him accountable, I mean, I know and I love Mark, but I think everybody needs to be accountable, and I think he does too.
It's a risk a founder has to know, right? When they're going to if they're going to list a company, they've got to be ready to be ousted if the time comes, right? I mean, that's just a part of listing.
But for me, I mean, you take the Snapchat example where they made a strategic change to the platform that was no good for users. If they go and kick out the CEO, I think it's Jason, they kick him out because of that one change, then what are you going to have? You're going to have tech companies that are super entrepreneurial, that are really sought after, that have an IPO, it goes great, they make one bad decision, all of a sudden they're no CEO anymore, and then you end up with these tech CEOs that are too scared to take risks. The risk is what makes them entrepreneurial, and is what, in many cases, makes that company what it is. And I just think you want to lose that, but I'm absolutely all for having checks and balances over privacy and things like that are morally
absolutely. It's a balance between getting entrepreneurs to want to take that risk, but also keeping it accountable. And I don't think this applies to every company. I think we're getting into these sort of super powerful businesses like Facebook or Amazon or Google, where we may have to think about, do those rules, should those rules apply? Because they simply have such influence over big swaths of the economy and of society.
I'm all about controlling them for sure, but being able to kick the CEO out, I don't know. If you bought in knowing what you got and you probably got a discount for it, then I don't know if you should have a right to then have that swapped out on you.
But not just for shareholders, but for consumers as well. Is it helpful to have a human face and for somebody who's going to take the rise but also take the fall?
Well, I think you take the fall because shareholders can vote with their money. If they all start selling out their stock and the share price declines, then that's the way that you voted, and that's the way that that a founder would take the fall. So you put yourself in there, you've got yourself a dual class of share, you can't be ousted, but if your share price is worth zero, then it happens naturally.
Yeah. What about the people using your product?
Oh, yeah. There'll always be a CEO, I think, regardless of what the structure is.
If there's a company, there's a CEO.
Yeah, I think I've seen research. If you go deeper in this, it's more than just is it super voting shares or not super voting shares. Yeah. There is another class where the shares sunset. So essentially, the CEO has control of the business, but there's an agreement that that's going to sunset over time. So he's going to relinquish that control. And so I think some studies show that those businesses have sunset clauses in these structures actually perform better than those that have no sunset clause. So, there is evidence to show that, eventually accountability for these CEOs is actually a good thing.
And I think it depends on what that sunset clause is too. I think at the moment, you look at, say, Larry and Sergey, when they've been there, they've done it, they're probably, I'm sure their heart's still in it, but they're not working, as closely in the business as they once were. At some point, you need those founders to be able to make a smooth transition and for the business to be able to survive past the founder. But these 2 and 3 year sunset clauses, to me, that's way too short.
That is too short.
Well, let's move on from that for the moment, because we've got some other topics to cover, including Naomi Osaka, a tennis player, of course, revealing her reason for splitting with her coach last month. She says she's refusing to put success over happiness, and it had nothing to do with money. So this begs the question, from a broader scale, what sort of sacrifices do you need to make to have success? It's an age-old question, isn't it? In terms of sacrificing happiness for success. It's a short-term thing. What do you think?
Yeah, personally, I don't think you should ever make that sacrifice. I think particularly if you live in Australia and modern societies where we have so many opportunities. I think you can live a happy life and be successful at the same time quite relatively easily. I'm not saying everybody can, but there's just so much opportunity in this country for people to live a great life without having to absolutely kill themselves. And that's not the case in other parts of the world. So I'm just speaking of Australia here. I think that's one of the great things about Australian society is people are very balanced. They hit a level of success and they often say, hey, I'm happy there. They're not as driven in other countries. I'm American, and sometimes I find Americans they'll work themselves into the ground just to get that extra 1%, 2%, 3%. Yeah. Just because everybody is so consumer focused.
Some people are super addicted to that success and that measure, and they realise that actually that's not what life's all about. And I'm a huge advocate for, say, work-life balance, or actually combining the two to a point where you're enjoying both of them. And I have too many friends that I know that they hang out all week and wait for Friday to come so they can have their weekend. And I say, if you're enjoying your weekend more than you're enjoying your weekday, then you should seriously consider what you're doing as a career, because life's too short. If you're going and slogging it out for 5/7 of your life and not enjoying yourself, then you've got a real issue on your hands. only a certain number of years that we're all here.
Yeah.
We may as well enjoy 100% of it, or at least be on a path to enjoying 100% of it.
Well, especially a professional tennis player and that coach relationship where you would be spending so much time together, and if someone's making you miserable, then no matter how much they're lifting your game,
enjoy what you
it's
do.
probably not worth spending time with them.
Yeah, and then she's obviously so successful, and I think she's been around a few years, so she probably has a little more perspective on what success and fame and money really mean.
She's only 21, so they're pretty wise words to say at 21 when a lot of professional athletes are just focused on.
She's an all-timer by some tennis standards, but I really respect what she said and what she's doing, and I'm not a professional tennis player, but if you read, I read Andre Agassi's autobiography years ago, and tennis just destroys your body. It's such a hard sport.
It's also emotionally.
You're on the road all the time. You don't have any relationships with anybody except your coach and your masseuse and your trainer.
Yeah.
And life is really hard as a tennis player. So good on her.
And he was miserable, wasn't he?
Yeah, well,
in that book, he
he
hated it.
The first line was, I hate tennis.
Tournaments and success in life is happiness, and I think she's probably chosen the right one.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on from that, it's happening. Emojis are taking over the roads. Kicking off in Queensland, Personalised Plates is launching number plates for your cars with your favourite emojis. They're decorative, but are they necessary? I mean, that's the question, isn't it? Oh, I don't know about this. I really, really don't like the idea of this.
If I could answer this question with an emoji, it would be the crying face emoji, I think. And I think it's a very, very sad day for society, and I wish that the Queensland government would stop trying to do things such as sports teams, number plates and emoji number plates. And what age are we living in where we still have, I parked here tonight, I get out of my car, I get a credit card or coins out of my dash to go and pay a parking meter to print out a little bit of paper to put in my windscreen. Why aren't they focusing on actually making the transport and the way that we get around up to date with modern society technology? I mean, an old metal pressed number plate,
with a smiley face.
They should be working on getting rid of the number plate, not putting emojis.
Well, they're getting rid of they got rid of regos on the cars.
Yeah,
now,
that's sad, isn't
so you don't have that, but you would think the number plates would go soon too.
Would you put a heart face on your?
Look, Facebook's partly the blame for this, I suppose.
Thanks for that.
I can actually remember the discussion inside Facebook about, in the old days, it was just the like button, and then they brought out the kind of emoticons a few years ago, and it was how many were there going to be, and what would they represent, and for Facebook it was good because it gives people more range of things to say and do, and we're living in a society now where texting and emoticons and emojis are just part of communication. So I get why they're doing it. I think we might look back in a few years and it's one of those things that'll look a little naff, I think.
A little naff.
A little. That's generous.
A lot naff.
But number plates serve a serious purpose at the moment. Until we can do away with
emoji for something like a text
weapon.
message or an email, it shows the emotion or the intent behind the message. Sometimes the things can be miscommunicated or misunderstood, and I think it works in that context. You do not need an emoji on the number plate of your car. This is just trying to sell more number plates.
It's just to make some money, and it gets in the news. People talk about Queensland.
Well, there we go. We're talking about it right now. And
do you want one for your birthday?
No, I definitely do not.
Okay.
Keep that off the list. Off my number plate. Sorry to say. All right. Well, thanks very much for joining us on the program. Stephen, Sheila, and John Winning.
Thank you.
As always.
Thank you.